Dog, I gotta nerd out for a second. So I want to talk for a little bit about like what sparked my interest in church history. It comes from an unusual place though. So unfortunately, the church, or at least the church that I grew up in and was going to at the time, did not spark my interest in church history. What sparked my interest in church history was actually my secular high school. Now, granted, some stuff did happen in eighth grade, and I was really going through some challenges in my faith, and there were people who were talking about the past events of the church and certain things there, but it never really grabbed my interest, not until ninth grade history class. And in ninth grade history class, we basically talked about history from, I believe, the Black Plague until to World War II. So that even means that we covered the Renaissance and the Protestant Reformation. Now, I did not actually know the Protestant Reformation even happened. I was so ignorant, and the more I learned, the more I learned that I'm very ignorant, and I am perfectly willing to admit that. However, the artist in me and the lover of the church and Christianity in me was really enamored by the Renaissance, uh, and that's what really sparked things for me. And then the Protestant Reformation we learned about right after that, and I was like, wow, this is a huge part of the history of the church that I was completely ignorant about. And it has ramifications for me today. So why not learn about this? So I started diving into church history and trying to find everything that I could. I've found a lot of sources since then, and I've listened to a lot. Admittedly, I could definitely read more, but there is so much to read and so much to do, especially when you're as involved with this as at least I want to be. But I absolutely love church history, and I would love to nerd out about it and talk about it on this account, and I certainly will, with this being the introduction to what I think could be a really cool series of videos. So, thanks for leaving this comment. I definitely try to understand church history. I definitely care about it, and I would encourage anyone else who cares about it to join me for the ride, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Hey, how's it going, everybody? Welcome back to the reassembling. Thank you for all the views, all the subscribers. I'd like to invite you to subscribe to the channel. If not, please hit that notification bell for future uploads. Also, you can follow us on Twitter, TikTok. We're on Clapper now, Instagram. But without further ado, I have a special guest. This is a gentleman who I met on the platform of TikTok, and you know that cross media has a lot of members from TikTok because it's the wild, wild west of theology. And believe it or not, there are some sound brothers and sisters out there. So I'd like to introduce to you Isiah Jones from Nerdy Christian. How are you doing, sir? It's good to have you on.
Hey, thanks for bringing me on, man. I'm doing all right. The throat's a little sore, but I'm doing all right.
Yeah, so it's funny. Let's talk about our little encounter. I think it was something to do with the Trinity, I believe. We'll get into that a little later, but I think you mentioned some councils. You mentioned Nicaea or something, and I just clicked. I had a comment on it, and I said, "Wow, someone
hmm
who really cares about church history." That's kind of how we met through that app. It's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, so there was a content creator that came across my For You page, and he was arguing that the Trinity is not biblical. And then in a companion video that he made that I saw, he argues for modalism, and we can get into what that is later. But I decided to respond to his first video, and where he makes a bunch of claims that aren't really true at all. I ended up having to quote Tertullian, because
That's right.
Tertullian is, and not the Catholic Church, is
Mm.
the first person to coin the term Trinity that we are aware of. I also had to, even though I'm not Catholic, I had to quote the Catechism of the Catholic Church
Mm.
in order to show him and the audience that the Trinity, nor does the Catholic Church teach that there are three gods.
Mhm.
And So, and then I saw your comment and liked it. And then you said, yeah, finally, someone who understands church history. I
Mhm.
was like, you know what? I like this comment, but I think it would be good to start a video series and launch one based on this comment where we talk about church history. So I replied with a video that serves as an introduction to that series, talking about where my love of church history came from.
Man, yeah, I love that. Let's talk for just 1 second. The environment and the theology of TikTok. What I've been on probably about going on 2 years now.
Mm,
There has been some really good instances where I've met wonderful people who I've actually learned some things from.
yeah,
But I think 75-80% of its content needs to be it's I'm trying my best to filter things out. And I know how it builds up an algorithm after stuff you reject and stuff you accept, stuff you watch more of. You'll stop seeing less and less of, like, women being, acting promiscuous and doing all this stuff. When you
yeah,
first get on the app,
yeah,
that's what you see, and it's concerning to me as a parent myself, seeing a young teenager, and this is the first thing they have access to, is to see all these young women, even boys are doing it. That's very
yeah.
troubling. But to try to Christianize TikTok, I think, is what the goal is for a lot of Christian content creators on there. What
Yeah.
were your initial thoughts when you first got onto TikTok?
So the very first time I ever got on TikTok was when I was at living at my brother's house. He had TikTok and I heard some of the things that were being said on videos. And my brother was a non-believer, than I was at the time. So, and still am by God's grace. So I decided to kind of respond to my brother instead and have dialogues with him uh, about some of the TikToks that he watched and things like that about religion and various other things. So, and then eventually that ended up getting me to download TikTok, and had it for a short period of time. Later on, though, I deleted it because I needed the space on my phone for other things. I was doing school on my phone at the time, for example. Then, just fast forward, living at my sister's place, I decided to get TikTok again, and I was like, you know what? I'm seeing a lot of things that I have opinions on, and I would like to share my opinions and to have good dialogue about these sorts of things. So I remember it was so terrible because I didn't know how to do anything. My very first video, my first profile name was Izzy MOF, and my first video was responding to a modalist, actually, which again we'll
Mhm.
get into later. But it was a female. It was a oneness apostolic Pentecostal
Okay.
on TikTok.
Mm.
So responded to her video. She said I could. We actually had dialogue in the comments, and that's kind of where it all started. And I've been continuing since.
Well, I love the name. If you guys go subscribe to his channel. You also have a YouTube channel by the same name.
Yeah, so eventually I changed the name to Nerdy Christian because I realized that I can reach all sorts of communities by engaging in a bunch of stuff that I love. I have a lot of different interests and hobbies. So you'll see content about anime, gaming, art, music, various things like that.
Hmm.
And the hope is to bring those communities onto my account so that they can, see a Christian who would love to talk about anime and I don't know D&D or Sonic with them, but also engage in good dialogue about Jesus Christ and my differences with them and their differences with me.
Yeah, that's amazing. I never even thought about it, but there's a lot of Christian content creators that are getting on Discord. They have a video game ministry. I'm like, that is so cool. Yes, I love video games. I never would have thought, hey, why don't I play this video game, do reviews on video games, and share the gospel? What a great
Yeah,
way to segue into, because I think the idea with the secular world is that, hey, Christians, they live over here, and they're like the Amish. They everything is of the devil. You know what?
yeah,
But we haven't represented Christianity to the utmost, in my opinion, for a long time. Um, but we do have that idea for the rest of the world to say, hey, yeah, that all that is the devil. What do you guys think is okay? And Christians are getting more, they're getting more bolder, and we're getting more, I would say tolerant, but we're getting more clever in the way we share the gospel with what means we do. Like we can do video games, we can do, like you said, D&D, um, movies. I mean, that's a great
Yeah.
thing.
Oh
Yeah.
yes, I could go on and on
Hmm.
about movies for sure. I know personally one. I don't know if you've ever heard of Dante's Inferno.
Oh yeah. Hmm.
So Dante's Inferno is a basically a work of the high medieval era that
Hmm.
is a story about this crusader named Dante who goes through these circles of hell. I think in the book he actually goes through purgatory as
Yeah,
well, and
there's
then
like
eventually,
seven layers of hell or something like that. I can't remember the actual.
yeah, yeah, he goes through hell, purgatory, I believe, and then heaven. Well, there's an animated movie and actually a video game which I really want to play, but there's an animated movie based off of it. That story called Dante's Inferno,
Mm,
and I watched it, and it is one of the reasons why I'm wanting to advocate for a kind of Christian movie or TV show, or book series that like engages in religious ideas and traditions that is derived both from the biblical text and a bunch of stuff outside of it in order to have those Christian messages. In large part, that's what the Lord of the Rings is. It is a explicitly Christian story.
mhm,
The creator of it wanted it to be a Christian story, and so he uses fantasy and allegory to do that.
mhm,
I think something like Dante's Inferno doesn't necessarily use allegory because Satan is very real, the church is very real, the hell is very real,
mhm,
demons are very real, all these kinds of things. But to skip over a bunch of different things, at the end of the movie, it is he grabs his cross, which is supposed to have a thorn from the real crown that was put on Jesus Christ's head, and he takes it out, and it is by the power of the cross that he receives forgiveness from his sins, that his fiance is restored, and
mhm.
she is able to go to paradise, at least in this movie, and the devil is defeated. And I think that that is a good gospel presentation. It's by the cross that sins are
Mhm.
forgiven, one is restored, and the devil is defeated. And
That's
so
awesome.
I think, yeah, so I think that if Christian movies were less politically
Mhm,
propagandistic and
mhm,
more cared about pushing Christian virtues of love, generosity, humility,
mhm.
various other things, and even explored topics at deep levels, I think that Christian media would be a lot better for it. But
Yeah, I
yeah,
think so too. Yeah,
that's a
a
whole
lot
other thing. But yeah,
a lot of people shun away from just strict Christian movies, saying it
oh yeah,
represents
have
itself
you seen
as a
the way
Christian movement.
Christians responded to that Noah movie they made?
Yeah,
Yeah, I
yeah, that was
actually
pretty wild.
liked the first like 2 hour and a half, 2 hours of that movie
Oh
because
yeah, it veers off, but yeah, it's got a good start to it.
yeah, because it basically is a religious uh, fiction movie because it's
Mhm.
incorporating stuff from the Enochic traditions,
Yeah,
stuff
it's.
even outside of that stuff from the biblical text in order to create a
Mhm,
story. Because if you went just, especially with something like Noah's Ark, excuse me, if you just went off the biblical text, it would basically just be a guy building a boat around evil people for 2 hours, and that's not interesting.
mhm. Yeah,
um, it's
yeah.
good to read in you know 2 chapters,
Mhm.
uh, but there's obviously a difference between taking something from a book and then translating that into a different media.
Yeah,
So
you gotta give it context, and the people like that that's gonna perfect segue into what we're talking about, church history, the importance of it, because God's intention was for the gospel to go out into all the world.
yeah,
So it had to be, were are we to assume that people in these other nations are just going to abandon who they are, the background they come from, and adapt a strictly Jewish culture in order to understand God? And I think
right,
God was very smart to have the Greek, the Koine Greek, the lingua franca of the time, where everybody can speak the language. But given a context, that's why Paul is going in, speaking about their philosophers, and getting on a
right,
on a platform where they could understand, um, the message of what he's trying to convey. When they're talking about the gods and all this, and he talks about the resurrection and stuff, they're kind of looking at him like, hey, well, you had us up to a certain point, but that resurrection thing, there's always the gospel message, but we do like to have that commonality with people, and I think movies are a great way, like Star Wars. I know it's not a Christian movie, but you have
Right.
people that are of the light of truth, and then there's people of darkness. It's a very biblical concept.
Yeah.
It's a misrepresentation of the Holy Spirit as a force, or the Jehovah's Witness. It's kind of a Jehovah's Witness Holy
Yeah.
Spirit, but
Yeah.
still, you get the point.
Yeah. I mean,
We
that's the
have.
point of typology, right? So
Hmm.
if we understand that the study of typology is comparing and, strictly speaking, I guess, comparing and contrasting things of the past to Jesus,
Hmm.
right? I guess, strictly speaking, that's how you could define typology. So Jesus does this. He says,
Hmm.
as the bronze serpent was lifted up in the wilderness, so
In the
must the Son
wilderness,
of
so
Man
must the Son of Man. Hmm.
be lifted up, right? So
Yeah.
there is a comparison and a contrast to the bronze serpent. And one of the interesting things is that whereas the bronze serpent was worshipped and was seen as an idol and thus a bad thing, Jesus is worshipped and is
Hmm.
seen as a good thing, right? So there's a contrast between the two, as well as a similarity in that when you look to the bronze serpent, you were healed. When you look to Jesus, you're
Hmm.
healed. And so, uh, if you take this understanding of typology, and something I've done at least, is take that understanding and apply it to movies and TV shows, you'll be
Hmm.
fascinated what you find. I think Superman is a phenomenal
Oh,
example
absolutely.
of someone
Yes.
who's like Christ.
Hmm. Yeah. Even I think we did an episode of that long time ago about some biblical meanings in secular movies, and I don't think they had an intent. They didn't have an intent on it, but I think that's the God code in every man that Paul talks about in Romans. So they know, they've seen his handiwork, they know of his creation, but some suppress the truth. But you'll see stuff like this, like Harry Potter, for example. The end of the franchise, we have Harry Potter laying his life down for his friends. Very Christian concept. Um, like
The
the line.
virtue of sacrifice is a
Yeah,
Christian
the
virtue.
the
Not to
Lion
say
King is
that
a good one.
Christianity is the only religion that cares about sacrifice, but
Mhm.
obviously it's its central theme, right? So,
Yeah, even if you look at, I brought up 8 Mile. What?
oh,
This guy's a potty mouth. Yes, he's a potty mouth. But what do you see in this? You see hope in light of his turmoil, in light of his upbringings, and all that
yeah,
that desire to see that better day. And it's a very bare bones Christian idea, but it's there. And I think that's
right.
fascinating forever to look at. But you can see those things when you look. Hey, there's a Christian concept there. The audience that supports that movie obviously don't see that, but we're like, hey, you can, there's a message in there. So fascinating thing. But I think that's the same context of what Paul's talking about. So yes, we can do video games, we can do the movies, with music. We don't always have
Oh
to
yeah,
necessarily listen. In my personal opinion, I know some of you out there might be, hey, but I don't think they will. But um, some secular music has some Christology in it, even though it's not intended
yeah.
to do
Yeah,
that. And
I
I
think
don't.
actually Skillet is a really good example of this.
Hmm.
They don't always make Christian, explicitly Christian songs.
Hmm.
Monster and Anchor are not explicitly Christian songs, but
Even Hero, but if you listen to if you can hear the message in Hero, he's that
yeah,
represents Christ all day. That's a fascinating. I love that song.
yeah. Which, yeah, and the whole concept of, I guess you could say, Christ being the true superhero
That's so
is
cool.
something interesting in and of itself. And I actually think Frank Turek has a book on this now, and Inspiring Philosophy,
Hmm.
who's also on YouTube.
Hmm.
Both of these guys are on YouTube and Christian apologists, and they both have content on like Christian media and secular media and seeing Christian themes in it and stuff. So yeah,
Hmm.
I would also encourage your audience to check those in mine too, to check those videos out.
Yeah, I'm a big Frank Turek fan. I like Frank Turek. I have his app. He's a bunch of cool stuff when he talks about the historical evidence of the shipwreck in Malta with Paul's, his that trip they took in Acts, and then he talks about the biblical evidence of the eyewitness testimonies and all that. Fascinating stuff, and it's crazy how I can like James White and I can like Frank Turek. They don't see eye to eye. It's so cool. We can live
Yeah,
in that world,
same here. Same here.
But okay, so in your own words, why is, and I think we should implement this in our daily Bible studies for everybody in their individual Bible studies. Why is church history so important? That's a big question.
Yeah,
Take your time.
I got you. So yeah, that I do think that is a really big question. Um, I think that there are several different reasons. I think that there are several different reasons why church history is relevant. I mean, one of the main reasons is that uh, you can see church history as if you're looking through a family photo album. That seems to me to be an accurate representation of church history in light of the fact that these are our spiritual ancestors. So what they say do matter, especially because we're standing on the shoulders of giants. And I guess that would be the second point. We are standing on the shoulders of giants. The fact that we have an English translation that we can read at any time what is suggests is indication of that fact, because we had Christians of the past who died to get the Bible in English into our hands. And so I think that would be the second point, and just one example of that second point. And I think the third point is that there is a lot we can learn. There's a lot we can disagree with. There's definitely a lot we can disagree with. But I do think that there's a lot we can agree with, and there's a lot we can learn from the the church fathers. One of the things that I learned is that, among many other things, one of the things that I've learned is that, like, faith and reason, for example, are not things that need to be held in contrast to each other, but are things that are actually very compatible and necessarily compatible with each other. So someone who I think represented that was Justin Martyr, who is considered by many to be the first Christian apologist. He was first a Greek philosopher, and he moved throughout different philosophies, didn't find any of them satisfying. Eventually, he is confronted by a Christian. He converts to Christianity, but he still wears the philosopher's robe or garb.
Mhm.
And the reason why is because I believe this is a direct quote from him. If not, it was certainly his idea. Is that Christianity is the true philosophy,
Mm.
and so I don't. That's one of the things that I've learned. Um, and practically speaking, I do think that the history of the interpretation of passages can help us understand them at times. I know when I was going to modalism, uh, there's a claim made that basically, if you read Matthew 28 verses 18 through 19, the
Mhm.
Great Commission, and
Yeah.
then you read Acts 2:38, it looks like they contradict each other because Peter is not doing baptisms in the way that Jesus asked us to.
Mhm.
So, and modalists will bring out this point and interpret it in a way that seems to bring the passages together. But I think that Augustine, I found, answers this problem
Mhm.
in what he says. I forget the exact book where he says this, but he basically argues that to baptize in the name of the Father and the Son and of the Holy Spirit has Christ for its authority, not any man.
The City of God, maybe, I think, is that what it's called?
He has a lot of different
He
books.
does. I think one of
City
his
of God
infamous
is,
ones.
perhaps City of God is his magnum opus,
Mhm.
but he also has
Basically.
retractions and other things as well.
Mhm.
But yeah, so he basically says, so I think that that in fact can help us reconcile these two passages, which is to
Mhm.
say, to baptize in the name or by the authority of Jesus Christ is to baptize in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy
Father,
Spirit,
Son, and Holy Spirit.
because
Mhm.
it is by his authority that he gave us that formula to use. And we see that formula used in a text called the Didache, which
Right.
is like a early church handbook to
First century.
the
Mhm.
convert. Yes, first or very very early second century. Yeah,
8120. Yeah.
yep. So and it has that baptismal formula in it as well. So I think there's a lot we can learn. I think there's a lot of really interesting stuff there, and I would definitely encourage people to engage in it and be open to
Mhm.
differing views. And I guess that would be one last point I could make is that it has helped me open up to differing views that disagree with me because I don't think that Christianity was lost for 1500 years and then began again with Protestantism.
Right. Exactly.
So
Mhm.
uh, I think that these people were Christians even in all of their glory and in all of their failure, whatever that may have been. And so you can read, for example, how these early Christians interpreted the book of Genesis,
Mhm.
and it is insane.
It is. Yeah. There's
It's
some.
not insane as in like terrible, but insane as in like it is wildly different than how
Mhm.
particularly American young earth creationism wants to understand it, and sometimes, not always, but sometimes lift up their interpretation as dogma.
Mhm.
And that kind of pushes against a lot of church fathers. And if young earth creationism, I guess, is the standard by which we see whether or not someone is a Christian, then I don't think any of these guys would have been Christian, and you would just have to think that Christianity was lost. And I don't believe that Jesus lost his church at any time. So, yeah, I would encourage you
Mhm.
guys to definitely engage in the study of church history.
Mhm. I can't I couldn't agree anymore. But I think Protestants, evangelicals, especially in America, I think the furthest they want to think back is Martin Luther, and even though he abandoned a lot of Catholic dogma, still held to some, um, the Eucharist stuff like that. But we would say in hindsight, look at he was still a heretic. But you put them in the context, and I love the historical context of church history. Leave them in the time they lived, the intent, the culture. How did their political system run? We're not a sacral system. There,
Yeah,
it was you go against the church. You're basically going against the state, and it makes sense to break apart stuff like the Inquisition, the Inquisitors. Why
yeah,
are these? Why are they going out to convert and try to expel heresies against the church? And this is where we have the witches and all this. It's totally unbiblical stuff, and we can see how we veered off. But I think it's
yeah,
important for 2023 for Christians to know this because we see this stuff reoccurring. And that's what we do on social media. People have that same idea and say, hey, say they want to bring up witches or something. You say you know the origins of it, you know where it comes, you know the
yeah,
development of it in Europe. You can
yeah.
you
And I
can
guess
pinpoint this stuff.
I guess that is one last point to make too, is that church history, knowing church history, at this point also serves as a defense of the faith or what is called an apologetic.
Thank you.
And because a lot of the attacks against
Mhm.
Christianity are attacks against its history.
Absolutely.
So, for
Mhm.
example, knowing how the church has influenced the rise of, for example, science, uh, knowing that would be important when dialoguing with an atheist who might think that the church has done nothing but hold
Pillin.
back scientific discovery.
Mhm.
Perhaps all they think is a completely misunderstood version of the history of Galileo, and
Yep.
that's all they know. They're not
Mhm.
aware of people before or after him or the actual facts behind the story of Galileo.
Mhm.
And so it would be important to bring those up just as one example. And then going back to TikTok, I definitely see that on TikTok. You definitely see a
Mhm.
the attack against the history of Christianity because all the unbeliever, I guess, needs to know is the Salem witch trials, the
Oh
Crusades, the
yeah, absolutely all
Inquisition,
that.
and that's it. But it's like there's a
Even the
history.
Anabaptists, knowing the Anabaptist
Yeah.
history, and I've talked a lot about the Munster Rebellion in Germany. It's a fascinating story. Have you ever
Hmm,
heard that story?
I have not.
We'll have to touch on that on a future episode. It's a medieval death cult in Munster, Germany, and it was just some wild,
Hmm.
crazy something you should know about. Be like, how is this not a movie? You would not have to exaggerate the script. This stuff
Honestly, a
happened in
lot of
history,
church history would make for a really good movie.
and I think
Honestly.
knowing the whole story, it's cool. When we have a proper hermeneutic to go through Genesis to Revelation, right? We have the story and its exegetical content and structure. But what
Yeah.
happened after the last apostle died? We have the
Right.
earliest evidence. That's why our faith is rooted in history. No other faith does this. We have, unless you're talking rabbinical, but that's something in a totally different sense. But
Yeah.
we're talking about people like Clement, his assertion of apostolic
Mm,
succession, right? And,
yeah.
and how and how the developments came from him into Ignatius and how he was dealing with the Gnostics. But we as Protestants and evangelicals, we don't have to identify and look exactly like they did in church history. And I'm not trying to pick on Catholics, but they tend to seem to do that, and they look at people like Ignatius. See, apostolic succession right there. That's where we have our popes and all that. But in
Yeah.
the context of where they're at, they're dealing with the Gnostic teachings coming through, and they're refuting them. And we the apostolic succession based on a monotheistic interpretation and not what these other people who don't have the apostles, they don't have the teachings of that, and they're coming with their baseless assumptions. What Irenaeus said,
Yeah.
but like we get Melito. When we get to Melito, we know how the Jewish canon was compiled, what the Jews believed, and that's a key important thing. And I think we had our personal conversation. We were talking about Roger Beckwith's Old Testament canon, New Testament church. Why that's important? What did the Jews believe at the time of the Second Temple? Because we
Yeah.
have this idea that the Apocrypha is part of the canon. It's in the old Protestant Bibles of 1611. It's even in earlier translations.
The 1611 King James. Yeah.
It's even in the Septuagint. Yes, but we
Hmm.
can we can with pinpoint accuracy tell you that the Jews did not believe in the apocryphal text. But we need to know a little church history and the transmission of the text to understand stuff like that. You brought up Justin Martyr, perfect example of how he is one of the first exegetes and thinkers in between, I would say, Paul and Origen. We had Origen's allegorical
Yeah.
interpretation where it kind of
Yeah.
crippled the church for 1100 years. But
Yeah, he's not oh, excuse me.
no,
He's
no.
definitely not the first one to interpret the text allegorically.
Mhm.
I believe Hippolytus of Rome, for example,
Okay.
interpreted the Song of Solomon as allegorical.
Hmm.
And then, of course, we have Ignatius, who seems to view Genesis somewhat allegorically as well. His interpretation is a little complicated, but yeah, no, I would agree with you, and I would agree with Dr. James White
Hmm.
and others that um, Origin definitely did some very interesting things
Hmm.
in his time, and one of those was among being like a Christian universalist who believed that
Yeah.
all, even the devil and his angels, would be saved. He also held to biblical books that we as Protestants don't, and even Catholics don't. And he also seemed to have a very allegorical reading of all of Scripture, which
Yeah.
is
It's
which is very interesting. Yeah, yeah.
yeah. Origen's commentaries on. He has a lot, like 2,000 treaties of commentaries and writings. By today's standards, a wild-eyed heretic. We know that, but we had it had to get to a
Yeah.
development. Then we have Tertullian, Cyprian, and all them.
Hmm. And
But
that's something I appreciate just about Protestantism is that
mhm,
we can kind of let the fathers be the fathers and all of their
yes,
mistakes, on all their highs and in all of their lows, and we don't have to see a reason to try to force our beliefs back
mhm,
onto people who didn't believe them. I don't necessarily think that the five solas are completely born out of nowhere.
right, a
They
reformed
they,
idea,
they
not
I don't think that they came out of a vacuum,
exactly.
but I don't see a reason to have to force those ideas back onto Clement, Augustine, John
Hmm.
Chrysostom, various others.